Cleveland podcast. All things Cleveland sports with your host, John Suchan. Hey, and good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of the Jenny Cleveland podcast. Hope everybody is doing well on this Wednesday afternoon, July 16th. Coming on a little bit later than the 4 o'clock that we anticipated. We had quite a storm come through the Columbus area, lots of lightning and thunder, so didn't want to get zapped. And with our technical difficulties in the past, I thought it would be best to wait. So we're back. The storm has rolled through, and I think we're all good to go now. Looks like everything is recording. Hopefully you're seeing me here live on the X, on Facebook, on YouTube. It's been a week, and we've got a few more days until the Brownies start training camp. The rookies will show up in I think the rookies show up on Friday. Today's the 16th. I think they come in on Friday, and then the veterans come in a few days later. We've been seeing various video of players and working out on the side, like Shedeur Sanders. And so, it's getting us all hyped. We've had quite the week with the news of Quinshon Judkins that came out this last couple days. He went on this trip down to Florida with a friend of his. They ended up getting into an altercation coming out of the airport. 5 or 6 days later, the other individual made the report. He was arrested, and then he was released on bond most recently. And so we have a lot of questions. Quinshon Judkins was drafted in the second round by the Browns at number 36. And there was a lot of promise and expectations coming into this season with him. The fact that Nick Chubb departed through free agency and he's no longer with the Browns. He's playing with the Houston Texans now. It's amplified all of what we're going through right now. And as fans, a lot of us are upset with the organization. Some of you had taken upon yourselves to continue to bash this organization, somehow trying to suggest that we all knew that this was going to happen. There were all these red flags, there were not red flags with Quinshon Judkins. I've talked about this on Stirring the Pot with Lou Marconi, my own Coffee Jolt show. There were no red flags. Some of you who are creating some of this, you're finding stories from when he left Ole Miss, and some folks down there that were upset that he was going to Ohio State wrote stories that wanted to create this narrative that he was some sort of bad apple, which was very far from the truth. Now, unfortunately, what's happened has happened. Not sure what's going to happen next. There are various reports. There are things that are being talked about as far as suspensions. The NFL is looking into the matter. I'm sure the Browns are as well. So we'll wait and see. It doesn't look like Quinshon Judkins will be starting off the season. If we take the example of Michael Hall and what happened to him from Ohio State and a year ago, his situation with the domestic issue, it would seem to suggest that Quinshon Judkins will probably not play very much, especially at the beginning of the season. So that leaves the Browns with their other drafted running back, Dylan Sampson, out of Tennessee, who had a very productive junior campaign. And then Jerome Ford, who we are all familiar with. Some of you like him. Some of you hate him. Some of you don't think he's very good. Some of you think that he's okay. When you look at statistics and thinking about what the Browns are going to do with the run game, it looks like, based on Quinshon Judkins not coming back, it would seem to suggest that the Browns are probably going to pull in some sort of other running back. Now, you start taking a look at running backs that are like, for example, free agents that haven't been picked up by anybody so far this season. That list is not very strong. Jamal Williams is one player, veteran player who used to play for the New Orleans Saints. He's available. Gus Edwards, who once played for the Los Angeles Chargers, is available. Jeff Wilson, who is down there in Miami, he's available. Chase Edmonds from Tampa Bay is available. D'Ernest Johnson is available, who we all are familiar with, who used to play for Jacksonville. He's out there. He's available. There's also John Kelly, who I think the Browns have always brought back. So I would say that probably John Kelly will be out there. Deontay Foreman, who we had here last year, he's still out there, available. Do the Browns consider bringing him back? So those are some of the unrestricted free agents that the Browns could consider bringing back as far as free, a running back group to go with the two that we're going to talk about here right now. That would include Dylan Sampson, the rookie coming in. He played sparingly his first couple seasons at Tennessee, and then last year he exploded onto the scene. He had almost 1,500 yards, had a very good game against Alabama. He scored 22 touchdowns. He is your fast running back who's not your bulldozer. He can explode and get you a burst of yardage and scamper to touchdowns to the end zone. So he may, I can't see him getting that starting role over Jerome Ford at this point. Jerome Ford has 3 seasons on him, and it would suggest that, he would be the guy that they would go with at the beginning of the year. Now, when you look at Jerome Ford, obviously some of you like him, some of you hate him. The 3 seasons that he had here in Cleveland were semi-productive. Obviously, he played alongside of Nick Chubb. Last season, he had 104 carries, 565 yards. Previous to that, he had, in his other year, the year that Chubb went out with that serious knee injury after the loss to Pittsburgh, he had 204 carries for 813 yards. Overall in his career, he has 1,390 yards. He has 7 touchdowns. He can be productive, but if you look at his game by game stats, over the seasons, he just doesn't do much. And I know some of you say, well, gosh, he has such an explosive step and he can score those long touchdowns, and he's had a few of them. But like going back to 2023, he had 1 or 2 games over 100 yards. The game against Baltimore that they won in 2023, where they came back and won that game in November, 33-31. That was one of the best games for the Browns that season. He had 17 carries for 107 yards. Previous to that, in the loss to Pittsburgh in that game there, Chubb went down. He came in and had a couple of big runs. It added up 16 carries for 106 yards. But if you remember, these are games where he usually goes over 100 yards is because he's had those big runs. Outside of that, he gets, 2 yards here, 3 yards here. He goes horizontally instead of up and down, north and south. And that's been the biggest gripe about him and how he runs. He doesn't see the gaps. He doesn't see the holes quick enough, and frustrates everybody that's watching him. And I'm sure he's frustrated because maybe he just can't see it like some other running backs can. And I think that's a real deficiency for him. It's something that has to be worked on. The Browns have to establish a run game this season. I've written about it earlier this week before the Quinshon Judkins story went down, that the Browns had a really piss poor running game last year. I mean, that's not news to you if you're a Browns fan. I think they were ranked number 29 in the league. They have been more or less up in that top 15 over the years, especially with Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt. They were in the top 4, top 5 a few of those seasons. What you do see are the teams that are consistent with their running game, like the Baltimore Ratbirds and the Philadelphia Eagles. Those teams are consistently up there in that top 5, and they consistently have winning football. You have to figure out how to establish the run game. And it's going to be a tricky thing now with this Quinshon Judkins bit. It's biting the Brownies in the butt. And the Browns are going to have to figure this out. Kevin Stefanski is going to have to figure this out. By the way, I want to give a shout out to Kevin Smith of Fans First Sports. He works with the group affiliate out there in Pittsburgh. I've mentioned Kevin before. I've been on Kevin's show before, and he had an interview yesterday with Kevin Stefanski. Yes, the Browns coach. Kevin Smith, who did the interview, has become friends with Kevin Stefanski. In New Jersey is where Kevin Smith lives. He was a high school football coach there, and the Stefanski is familiar with. Goes there in that part of the world during the summers. They met. He's helped out with his high school team. Stefanski has or been there with the high school team, and so they've had a couple interviews. So check that interview out. It's out there on Kevin Smith's X page. He's part of Fans First Sports. It's a really good interview. Gives you some more insight into Kevin Stefanski. He talked a little bit, for example, about the draft and having, certain players that you are anticipating drafting, but then having to go to plan B if things don't work out. He did clarify, I know sometimes when they talk about, when so-and-so was drafted, boy, they didn't really look that happy when that selection was made. Well, oftentimes there's a delay in the production of the TV and whatnot, and so I knew that. Those of you who are smart enough to follow football know that too. But some people like to go with it and say, "Oh, Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski aren't happy about this pick because they look stone cold on the TV cameras." And these you idiots out there who try to throw that negative narrative again. You just need to go away. Start rooting for another team. I've already talked about that endlessly this week on my other podcast, but it is rather annoying. Did I say that earlier in the week too? I think I did. Hey, let's pause here for a quick commercial break. This is the Johnny Cleveland podcast. Hey, and thanks for coming back to the Johnny Cleveland podcast, part of the Fanatical Elves Network, part of Fans First Sports Network. We appreciate you coming along on the ride. We're Browns fans just like you. We are getting pumped, excited for this upcoming training camp that is literally a few days away. And maybe we'll stop talking about the Guardians. The Guardians who've been up and down. They've struggled. Had the All-Star game last night out there or down there in Atlanta, Georgia. There have been some rumors swirling about Clase and maybe Stephen Kwan being on the trading block, maybe with the Dodgers. Stephen Kwan came through last night. His American League team was down 6-5 in the bottom of the ninth, and he had a nice little tapper to the third baseman and outran the throw to first base, and the American League was able to tie the game up. They took it into this extra period where the teams got to have players hit home runs, and the National League won because their one guy hit more home runs than the American League guy. So congratulations to the National League, who I think this is like only their second win in the last 12 or 15 seasons. So good for them. The Guardians have struggled. They had lost 10 straight, but then they came back strong. They swept the Houston Astros and then took 3 out of 4 from the Chicago White Sox, and they stand 46-49 going into the second half of the season. Or I think 4 games back of a playoff spot. So anything's possible. I know that's been a lot of conversation about this team, and I already talked about it in my other shows this week, but the Guardians have been pretty successful over the last, decade or two. They don't always win overwhelmingly, but they've had more consistent winning records. And I know some of you don't like the ownership of the team and how it's being run, and you think that they're cheap, but they're still somehow winning. So take that however you wish. I hope that the Indians or the Guardians can get it back. By the way, it would be nice to go back to just being called the Indians so that I don't have to keep going back saying, oh, the Indians or the Guardians. I know there's a push for that. The Redskins might become the Redskins again after being the Washington Commanders. We will wait and see what happens. Okay, so lastly, I just wanted to touch base on this briefly. before I depart, and I've talked about this topic before, and Caitlin Clark, the WNBA, I know there are a lot of you WNBA fans out there, and I'm old school, but I want to talk about this old school thing, this reference I'm making, and then the writing these days, and the way folks are writing articles and publishing, and it's just bad journalism, And I had another example of this, and it included Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark's been playing through some injuries. Caitlin Clark is supposed to be the star of the WNBA, and I know maybe I'm picking on this situation, but, and this is where I go back to my old school ways, and other might talk about old school ways, but they aren't really reflecting it with their bad journalism. So Caitlin Clark was in this game last night. She re-injured her injury, which was like a groin injury. In the process, there was some point late in the game or third quarter where she had some sort of argument with one of the refs, old-time ref, guy ref, and she's caught on camera telling the ref, "You're embarrassing." This is what she says: "You're embarrassing. I'm gonna go call the office on you. I'm calling the WNBA on you because you're a terrible ref." And I guess it doesn't surprise me. I already talked about Caitlin Clark, and I know there are many of you out there that love her to death, and she can do no wrong. But maybe this is where things are really going off the wheels here with sports and media and everything like that. Caitlin Clark earlier in the day was coming into the game, and the first thing that I noticed, a lot of these WNBA players, they come in and they get them on camera and they're wearing their dazzling outfits, and Caitlin Clark's coming in with one of her outfits, and she's on the phone. Everybody's always on their phone. I know I get on my phone too often. So that set the tone for me. It's like, you're coming in, you're on your phone, people are watching you. I just think it sets a bad example. When you're talking to kids these days and working with youngsters and who are in sports or doing whatever, it's important that they can find people in their lives that are positive influences. And I know some people will say, "Oh, well, Caitlin Clark is that. She's a superstar. She's 23 years old. She's the face of the WNBA, blah, blah, blah." Yeah, she is. She's been kind of forced that. And, people are filling the stadiums and the arenas for that. Great. I will point out that the WNBA still loses money every year. The NBA is the one that is keeping the WA alive because of the lack of money that actually the WNBA brings in. They are bringing in more with Caitlin Clark, but they have a ways to go. The other part of this is then you get into the game. And I know these players, and I've been around athletes all my entire life in a coaching spot. And I know athletes can be very driven and demanding, and they want to be perfectionists. It's part of what drives them to be the greats that they are. And I'm not taking away Caitlin Clark's abilities here. But in her game, in the moment, she takes it upon herself to then bash another individual, a referee. And I know there's been a lot of conversation about how Caitlin Clark's being unnecessarily beaten up or bashed, and players are doing things to her that they wouldn't do to other players. Caitlin Clark's not the biggest kid in the world, and so some people have taken offense to that. And in this moment, though, Caitlin Clark took it upon herself to shout out something and pretty much try to embarrass this other referee. When I'm seeing that, there's a real sense of entitlement that this kid thinks that she has. And that's a really sad part that I see happening, not only with Caitlin Clark, but so many of these athletes that we follow, that they have the ability to step out in front of cameras, and they know that the cameras are there to try to embarrass others. A lot of you know that I didn't really care for Ty Jerome. I know many of you liked Ty Jerome and thought he was fantastic and did so many wonderful things for the Cleveland Cavaliers this year. But I still am bothered by the fact that he wanted to point out in his conversation one time after a game, he called out the two female referees that were refereeing one of the NBA games during the season. and it still never sat well with me. As a fan, as somebody who's watched and coached sports over the years, these players are doing these things that are just callous and not necessary, in my opinion. There's no place for it, and it's making the sport more difficult to watch and cheer on these players who are feeling that they are entitled. You take that next step, and then you get into this sort of bad journalism. I guess Caitlin Clark has a brother named Colin, and there's a writer out there who writes for Outkick. His name is Zach Dean. Outkick is one of these more conservative publications where they say a lot of things that are very that can be looked at as very rude and obnoxious toward another way of thinking, more of a liberal way, or that kind of scenario. So the writer that I'm referring to wrote an article about what happened with this Caitlin Clark and calling out the referee. And he mentioned the brother supposedly put something out on social media saying that the refs really basically caused Caitlin Clark's injury. Supposedly that tweet was taken out off Twitter or the X by the brother later on. But then you read about it through this other guy's perspective, and this is this young guy named Zach Dean. And I don't know anything about Zach Dean other than what I've written or seen and read about him. But when you do look at what he's written, just about his writing, they're very he wrote an article about being added to the Outkick publications like 3 years ago. I went back and found this article that he wrote, and he talks about himself being old school and being able to write articles where he can just share his opinion and not have any opinion, or really, like, he's just going to write it how he wants and people can make up their own mind. But I went back and I looked at all of the examples of the titles of his articles, and it's just not very good journalism. I call it bad journalism. And I hope that you, as a listener or somebody who's watching this on the X or Facebook right now or YouTube, knows the difference. And it's just, I think it just adds to this whole narrative and what we're seeing between the athletes and even writers. There's a lot of junk out there. And I think just for myself and for some of the writers that I know specifically here on the Fanatical Elves Network and Fans First, these writers that I know personally, they take a lot of time and effort to do a lot of background, do a lot of research, and do the due diligence. That you don't see that everywhere. And hopefully you can mix and match. It's even more irritating, especially when people who are out there right now, who are behind your keyboards, and it's easy for you to say, well, you're doing a piss poor job at this, or you're not doing this, which is the polar opposite. Like I said, many of us who do the writing, we do spend the time and the effort, and it's easy for those of you behind the keyboards just to kind of say whatever you want to kind of make your point, even though your point's not proving anything. In this case with Zach Dean, he has a lot of titles, and keep in mind, he talks about just sharing his articles and not really having a huge interest or opinion, but letting other people make up their minds. But when you write articles, and these are some of the titles of his articles, it certainly is an opinion. There was let's see here. His article that he talked about Caitlin Clark and the brother, was Caitlin Clark's brother rips WNBA officials after Clark lashes out, threatens sleazy ref. The article he wrote, and I give this guy credit, he writes a lot of articles. He wrote about the home run derby, saying ESPN's awful home run derby broadcast was potentially the worst TV viewing experience in sports history. So he definitely is giving his opinion. There are other articles further down his page. You can check him out. Feel free. You can do a Google search yourself. Here's another title from 4 days ago. College football coach resigns after scumbag lib writer cried about his nasty Trump message. And then there was another one. Let's see here. There was another. So let's see. And then he has another title called Smoking Hot. Charlie Hall offers medical update after collapsing during tee shot. So supposedly this is a golfer, like his beginning, calling her smoking hot. The point being, and I know I'm pointing out this guy's writing, and Zach, if you're watch this or listen to this, love to chat with you about your writing style. You're welcome to it. Obviously, you're very successful. You're kicking my butt while you're writing for Outkick, which is a very popular publication these days. But it's just piss poor, bad journalism. And I hope those of you who watch this podcast here on the Johnny Cleveland Show or any of our podcasts here on the Fanatical Elves Network can tell the difference between what's good and what's bad as far as being professional. And I think that's what it comes down to. And there's just so much that you see right now with athletes. Caitlin Clark, who's at the height of her 15 minutes of fame. Now, I know it's probably more than 15 minutes of fame, but her calling out a ref when she knows the cameras are all there and acting like she's and threatened him and saying, I'm going to be calling the office. She's 23 years old. Caitlin Clark, you're 23 years old. It's just not the way that things should be done, in my honest and valuable opinion, right? Well, take it for what it's worth, but I hope that you can weed through what's good and what's bad. And those of you who read a lot of stuff here on our network or other folks who do podcasts for Cleveland can find the good stuff out of the bad stuff. There's a lot of bad stuff out there, and I hope most of you have figured that out, or you just don't pay attention to it and you just completely ignore it, which sometimes we have to do. I hope everybody has a very good rest of your Wednesday. The sun is actually peeking out here again in Columbus. I think we're going to get some more storms later tonight, but in the meantime, take care. Have a very good evening and go Browns and keep smiling. Take care, buds and gals.